Elevate Your Thinking. The Blueprint for Mental Greatness. Audiobook. By Audible Insights. Introduction. You've likely felt it, a subtle anxiety gnawing at the edges of your everyday experience, whispering that you're capable of more but somehow stuck in place. It can feel like you're caught in a maze of repetitive thoughts, each one justifying hesitation and fear. You sense a deeper capacity for growth, yet it remains locked behind doubt, uncertainty, and a mind cluttered with self-imposed limitations. Perhaps you've tried quick fixes or sought fleeting motivation, but the struggle persists because real transformation demands more than a surface-level approach. Right now, you are on the edge of a profound journey, but that tension also holds the promise of forging new mental pathways that elevate every aspect of your life. From the moment you step into this journey, you begin dismantling the mental structures that have kept your potential out of reach. You will learn not only to recognize how your mind deceives you, but to rewrite the thoughts that once held you back. The road ahead challenges you to become aware of your inner architecture, to question it, and to rebuild from the inside out. You are about to confront the hidden scripts embedded in your mind, the ones that sabotage your potential and keep you circling the same draining patterns. This audiobook aims to break through those walls by guiding you beyond temporary inspiration into a space where your mindset fundamentally shifts. The process will feel both exhilarating and unsettling, because true growth often arises from discomfort. This is not about achieving a single victory and calling it a day. It's about adopting a different lens through which to see yourself and the world. When that lens changes, everything changes. Let us begin. Chapter 1. Unmasking Your Mind. Think of a time you felt confident about something, only to be derailed by a sudden, inexplicable wave of doubt. You might have brushed it off as nerves or caution, but underneath it lay a script that your mind had quietly played for years, one that casts you as incapable, unworthy, or unprepared. In this moment, you start to see that not every thought is a reflection of truth. Many are echoes of past experiences, insecurities, or even borrowed fears that found a home in your mental landscape. When you begin to unmask your mind, you discover how often it passes off assumptions as facts. It's like stepping backstage in a theater and realizing that the towering structures on stage are just pieces of painted plywood. You notice that the mind is adept at weaving convincing stories, sometimes so subtle that you barely realize you're accepting them as reality. Here, the shift is about moving from blind belief in your thoughts to active inquiry, questioning what your mind tells you, especially when it positions you as small or powerless. Over time, this becomes a habit, acknowledging the thought, examining its origin, and then deciding whether it serves you. It feels awkward at first, as though you're questioning an authority figure. But persist, and you'll feel your mental grip loosen. The second practical move is to start labeling the stories your mind repeatedly tells. Maybe you notice a script that always runs when you meet new people, insisting you'll be judged or disliked. The first practical move on this path is to invite gentle skepticism toward each self-limiting thought. The moment a doubt arises, perhaps telling you that you aren't ready for a career change or that you should keep your opinions to yourself, you practice pausing. In that pause, you remind yourself, this is one viewpoint among many. You let the doubt be there without conceding it the final say. You mentally tag it as fear of rejection story or not good enough story. By labeling these thoughts, you dismantle their power to blur into a vague sense of dread. You see them, name them, and separate them from your authentic voice. This shift fosters a sense of inner distance, allowing you to watch your mind at work instead of letting it run the show. Finally, envision a small circle that represents your day-to-day perspective. Now imagine stepping outside that circle. The same doubts may appear, but they lose their sting when you see them as conditioned reflexes rather than facts. By the end of this chapter, you start to experience a new confidence in relating to your own mind. There's an initial lightness in realizing that not everything you think is a reliable compass. This emerging perspective sets you on the path toward genuine freedom, a freedom that begins with the knowledge that you are more than the voices in your head. From there, you look back on yourself and your thought patterns with curiosity. This act of taking a mental step back helps you sense the difference between who you are and the narratives your mind spins. Though the boundary might feel faint at first, it grows stronger as you continue to observe rather than obey. As you develop this heightened awareness, you'll notice less internal turbulence. From here, we'll journey deeper into the structures of your mind, confronting the subtle and not so subtle ways it resists discomfort. The next step is to embrace what you might have been avoiding, the uncomfortable edges where true growth can flourish. Chapter 2. The Power of Discomfort. Recall a time you desperately wanted to avoid a situation, maybe a challenging conversation, a daunting project, or a new environment that felt foreign. That sensation in your gut, a mixture of dread and uncertainty, often stands as the gatekeeper between you and real progress. In a world that celebrates ease and convenience, it's natural to gravitate toward comfort. Yet when you make peace with discomfort, you unlock a hidden door to your most profound transformations. The mental shift here involves reinterpreting discomfort. Instead of viewing it as a threat, you begin to see it as an ally pushing you to question old habits. By treating discomfort as a catalyst rather than an obstacle, you reshape your emotional response to challenges. This is more than just facing your fears. It's about inviting a new vantage point, where each twinge of unease signals an opportunity to transcend your previous limits. To ground this in action, you experiment with small moments of self-imposed discomfort. Perhaps you decide to speak up first in a meeting or volunteer for a task that forces you outside your comfort zone. The key is approaching these small steps with an attitude of curiosity. How does your mind respond? Which limiting beliefs bubble to the surface? When you willingly step into discomfort, you discover more about your internal workings than you ever could by staying in the cozy realm of the familiar. Next, you challenge yourself to celebrate the feeling of awkwardness or fear as a sign of growth. This is not about toxic positivity, but about reframing. Each time you endure that flutter of anxiety and push forward anyway, you're training your brain to associate difficulty with expansion. Over time, your system adapts, and the sense of apprehension that once immobilized you becomes a signal. Here lies an opening for growth. This reversal of the usual avoidance reflex can feel electrifying. You find yourself less daunted by potential failures or setbacks because they represent stepping stones rather than dead ends. As you weave these experiences into your everyday life, you start noticing that your tolerance for uncertainty grows. Stressful situations remain challenging but are less paralyzing. Rather than shutting down, you engage more fully, trusting that the discomfort holds lessons you can use. This new attitude reverberates beyond your internal world, influencing how you show up in relationships, work, and personal goals. You're no longer avoiding life's sharper edges. Instead, you meet them head-on, curious about how they can shape you. By chapter's end, your relationship with discomfort is already shifting. You see discomfort not as a sign of weakness or danger, but as a meaningful prompt to evolve. You realize that each uneasy moment paves the way for discovering inner reserves of courage and resilience. This isn't about seeking hardship for its own sake. It's about understanding that genuine growth rarely arises in a vacuum of safety. Next, we'll look at how emotional reactivity can hold you hostage and how stepping outside those reactive loops frees you from old chains. The journey continues with examining emotional triggers and choosing how you respond rather than letting them command you. Chapter 3. Breaking Emotional Chains. Imagine a conversation spiraling out of control. Something trivial sets off a cascade of defensive words, and by the end, you feel a wave of regret, wondering why you reacted so intensely. Emotional reactions often hijack your best intentions, turning what could have been a calm exchange into a battlefield. Understanding how to break free from these emotional chains is about more than managing anger or frustration. It's about reclaiming the power to choose your responses, even in the heat of the moment. The essential shift here is recognizing the difference between feeling an emotion and letting it dictate your behavior. Emotions are not the enemy. They provide vital signals about your internal state. Yet when emotions become unexamined triggers, they can lead you down the same destructive paths again and again. The goal is to see an emotion for what it is, information, without allowing it to decide your actions. This transition from knee-jerk reaction to mindful response is what sets you on a liberating path. Begin by catching the early stirrings of intense emotion. Whether it's frustration, jealousy, or impatience, there's often a distinct moment when your body tenses and your thoughts narrow. Instead of charging forward, practice pausing just long enough to acknowledge what's happening inside. You might say to yourself, "I feel anger building," or "I sense a wave of sorrow." This pause can feel excruciating at first, as if you're resisting a powerful current. But acknowledging the emotion without rushing to act dissolves a layer of impulsivity. Next, ask yourself what this emotion is trying to communicate. Perhaps anxiety signals an underlying fear of loss or failure. Frustration might reveal a sense of unmet needs or a boundary crossed. By interpreting the emotion's message, you separate it from the immediate urge to retaliate or shut down. In doing so, you reclaim the freedom to choose. Do I need to clarify my concerns calmly? Should I step away to collect my thoughts? Is this even worth my energy? This reflective process takes a fraction of a moment, yet radically alters the course of an interaction. Over time, you'll find that exercising this choice fosters a sense of mastery. You're no longer at the mercy of someone pushing your buttons. You become an observer of your emotional landscape, aware that you can acknowledge a feeling without letting it dictate your next move. This is not a path to emotional numbness. On the contrary, you begin to experience your emotions more deeply and authentically because you're no longer drowning in them. You learn to navigate life's emotional currents with agility, letting yourself feel fully, but choosing actions aligned with your deeper values. At this juncture, you sense a new form of liberation. You see how breaking free from emotional chains grants you dignity and calm under pressure. This newfound self-command informs everything you do, from the way you handle conflict to the energy you bring to personal and professional endeavors. As you look ahead, the next logical step is to harness your focus, channeling this emotional clarity into deliberate action. We'll explore how the power of focused attention can elevate your day-to-day performance and creativity, building on the emotional freedom you've begun to cultivate here. Chapter 4. Choosing intentional focus. Think of how your attention flutters when you scroll through social media or juggle multiple demands at once. It's easy to slip into a reactionary mode of being, where every beep, buzz, or random thought pulls you away from what truly matters. This scattered state doesn't just reduce productivity. It disrupts the deeper sense of purpose that comes from immersing yourself wholeheartedly in the present moment. To choose intentional focus is to seize control of your mental spotlight, guiding it toward what genuinely deserves your attention. This shift begins with recognizing the cost of fragmented focus. When you spread your attention across trivial distractions, you dilute the energy needed to create meaningful progress in your life. By contrast, when you direct your mental lens intentionally, a quiet power emerges. Tasks that once felt burdensome transform into opportunities to immerse yourself in the fullness of the moment. Small details become rich with insight, and your work begins to reflect a deeper sense of care and involvement. One approach to solidify this mindset is creating daily focus windows, brief, dedicated blocks of uninterrupted time. In these windows, you commit to silencing notifications and resisting the impulse to multitask. Initially, you might wrestle with discomfort or restlessness as your mind demands its usual diet of quick hits of novelty. Persist, and you will feel a mental calm form. With fewer interruptions, your thoughts can dive deeper, revealing layers of creativity and efficiency you hadn't realized were possible. Another approach involves noticing the internal distractions, the random streams of thought that surface when you're trying to concentrate. Rather than criticizing yourself for getting distracted, gently return to your chosen task again and again. Imagine each redirection as a small weight lifted in a mental gym. Over time, this repetitive practice strengthens your capacity to remain present. You realize you're building a disciplined mind, one that can withstand the pull of constant stimulation. As you cultivate intentional focus, a sense of profound satisfaction emerges. Tasks are completed with a thoroughness and mindfulness that make them more meaningful. Even mundane responsibilities feel imbued with purpose because you're fully invested in them. In the next chapter, we'll explore the powerful link between your beliefs and your identity, revealing how altering one can redefine your entire life trajectory. Chapter 5. Rewriting your identity. Consider the labels you've carried with you: shy, non-athletic, not cut out for leadership, or any number of traits you might have adopted as if they were set in stone. Each label acts like a frame that shapes how you see yourself. This attentive energy naturally spills over into conversations, relationships, and your personal goals, allowing you to connect more deeply and produce better results in all areas. With this foundation, you've begun to sense a new level of mental clarity. You're learning to guard your attention, valuing it as a finite resource that shapes your inner world as much as your outer achievements. Now you're prepared to take a deeper step in reshaping how you see yourself at the core. Over time, these frames can morph into self-fulfilling boundaries, limiting your willingness to explore new possibilities. Yet identity isn't static. It's woven from stories you tell yourself. When you learn to rewrite that narrative, you open the door to a version of you that's not bound by past definitions. This mental shift starts by challenging the notion that your identity is a fixed entity. You realize that you are a dynamic being, continually evolving through experiences and choices. The stumbling block for many is that they mistake current traits for permanent truths. So if you've always described yourself as someone who can't speak in public, you turn that into an unchanging fact, rather than a present condition you can alter. Recognizing this misconception dissolves a limiting illusion, freeing you to ask, "Who do I want to become?" rather than, "Who have I been?" To put this into practice, you experiment with crafting an identity statement that feels just beyond your comfort zone, yet authentically possible. Maybe you start telling yourself, "I am someone who handles challenges with composure," or "I am a creative thinker who finds solutions in tough situations." This isn't empty affirmation. It's a conscious reorientation toward a new self-image. Each day, you look for evidence, no matter how small, that supports your evolving identity. Gradually, these aligned actions reinforce the story you're constructing. You also begin to notice subtle shifts in your behavior. You might speak up in a meeting, volunteer for a role, or engage in a hobby you previously dismissed as not for me. Each choice, no matter how modest, sends a signal to your mind that you are stepping into this redefined identity. Over time, these micro-shifts accumulate into genuine transformations. You discover that you've moved from trying to act confident to realizing you naturally feel more self-assured. From a distance, people notice the changes, often long after you've already sensed them within yourself. By allowing yourself to rewrite who you are, you lay the groundwork for a future not hindered by outdated scripts. And that's the essence of true self-development. Learning to see identity as fluid, amenable to the influences of choice, action, and vision. As you continue this process, you'll realize that your thoughts, emotions, and focus all align more fully with this new version of you. We'll next explore how to refine your inner dialogue so it consistently supports the identity you're forging. This evolution in self-talk empowers you to fortify your mental resilience and expand your sense of what's truly possible. Chapter 6. Mastering Internal Dialogue. Picture the moment when your own thoughts turn against you, whispering that you're incapable or unworthy right before an important step forward. It can feel like standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering between aspiration and retreat. This is the subtle but persistent presence of your internal dialogue. an ongoing commentary shaping how you see yourself and your possibilities. The moment you learn to guide that inner voice, it transforms from critic to coach, opening a path to deeper confidence and clearer action. You begin by noticing how easily unexamined mental chatter can undermine you. The mind's ability to generate stories about your worth, your readiness, or your prospects is powerful. But many of these narratives come from outdated fears or societal expectations that no longer serve you. The key shift involves recognizing when an inner message is steering you off course. You start to see these messages not as truths, but as suggestions. The difference is enormous. Instead of letting a negative thought pass final judgment on you, you start to treat it as a single viewpoint in a crowded mental forum. One practical approach is to tune in to the tone of your internal voice, especially in high-stakes or stressful moments. Does it speak in absolutes? I always fail at this, or I'm never going to get this right. Each time you catch that rigid language, you quietly insert a more flexible phrase, such as, "This might be challenging, but it's doable," or "I haven't mastered it yet, but I'm learning." Initially, this might feel forced or hollow, but with repetition, it begins to lay new mental groundwork. The real power lies in experiencing how a shift in wording alters your emotional state. Where you once felt dread, you now sense possibility. Another strategy is to keep short, forward-focused cues in mind. If you're about to tackle a task that sparks anxiety, you prepare a concise, self-affirming sentence. "I handle difficulties with resourcefulness." It's not about blithe positivity. It's more like programming your mental response. You hold that statement in your mind, allowing it to soften the usual assault of doubt. Over time, you come to expect your inner voice to encourage rather than tear you down. The process is gradual, but each mindful redirect forms a link in a new chain of thinking. Embracing this new dialogue means moving beyond superficial cheering. If you blindly contradict your fears, insisting you're invincible when every fiber of your being feels uncertain, your mind resists. Instead, you acknowledge the nerves, then counter them with a grounded perspective. "Yes, I'm nervous, and I can still proceed." This approach respects the reality of your feelings, while reminding you that they need not halt your progress. You learn to trust yourself in the face of self-doubt, ultimately experiencing these moments as gentle nudges toward growth, rather than red lights blocking the road. In mastering your internal dialogue, you find a deep sense of self-ownership. You're no longer a passive recipient of whatever messages drift through your mind. You engage in an active partnership with your thoughts, guiding them toward narratives that support your highest intentions. This shift resonates through your daily life. You stand taller in conversations, approach work tasks with calm conviction, and navigate personal challenges with a steady sense of direction. With your mind now evolving into an ally, you become ready for the next step, learning to pivot quickly when rigid thinking arises, turning uncertainty into strategic advantage. This prepares you to embrace mental flexibility and adapt rather than become trapped by a single perspective. Chapter 7. Embracing mental flexibility. Imagine a situation where plans fall apart last minute. You've scheduled your week down to the hour, only for an unexpected event to send everything sideways. In that moment, frustration surges, spurred on by a sense of loss of control. Mental rigidity insists that deviation from the plan spells disaster. But what if you had the capacity to pivot swiftly, seeing the unexpected as an opening rather than an obstacle? That capacity is the essence of mental flexibility. The willingness to explore new viewpoints, revise strategies, and adapt rather than resist. You begin by examining the moments when you feel your thoughts tighten, when your mind latches onto a single approach or outcome. The tension often arises from fear that an alternative path may fail, or that uncertainty will lead you somewhere uncomfortable. To move beyond this fear, you practice stepping back and asking, "Is there another possibility?" You might be surprised at how many alternatives appear once you allow for them. This simple question creates a space between your habitual reaction and a new perspective. Another powerful method for building adaptability is setting aside time to deliberately challenge a fixed assumption. Take a deeply held belief about yourself or your abilities and play the what-if game. For example, if you're convinced you're terrible at public speaking, you spend a few minutes imagining a scenario in which you could excel at it, visualizing the possibility of training, smaller practice sessions, or creative ways to present. The goal is not to force a new belief, but to loosen the grip of the old one. By entertaining a possibility that contradicts your usual narrative, you train your mind to become more fluid and open. You also benefit from embracing small disruptions. Rather than seeing them as annoyances, you treat them like a daily exercise. If a meeting is cancelled unexpectedly, you use the reclaimed time to work on something you've postponed for too long. If an activity must shift locations, you view it as a chance to explore a new environment. Each conscious choice to adapt rather than lament grows your mental muscle for flexibility. Before long, you find yourself more at ease in chaotic situations, able to navigate them with an almost playful sense of creativity. As you cultivate this mental elasticity, you discover an inner freedom that rigid thinking could never provide. Problems become puzzles waiting to be solved instead of brick walls. Even in moments of genuine setback, you can pivot to find fresh routes forward. This adaptability feeds your resilience, ensuring that setbacks no longer feel like permanent defeats. Instead, they morph into turning points that can lead you to solutions you might never have considered if you'd insisted on a single vision. By embracing mental flexibility, you gain a strategic edge over the uncertainties of life. You're far less likely to be thrown off course by changes or challenges. Instead, you see them as natural parts of a shifting landscape, confident you'll find a path even when the path is not obvious. This mindset sets the stage for reinterpreting failure altogether. Next, you'll explore how to view mistakes not as damning verdicts, but as catalysts for growth and mastery, transforming your relationship with setbacks in powerful ways. Chapter 8. Reshaping Failure. Recall a time you poured energy and hope into a goal, only to watch it collapse in a moment of disappointment. Perhaps it was a career move that backfired or a personal project that fizzled. The anguish that follows can be sharp, often magnified by the voice in your head claiming you are the failure rather than simply experiencing one. Yet failure, when viewed from a broader perspective, is often the most potent teacher. The challenge is learning to separate your self-worth from the outcomes you chase. You begin this shift by recognizing that mistakes are rarely final judgments of your potential. They're snapshots in time, evidence of a specific attempt under certain conditions. Labeling yourself a failure goes far beyond the data the situation actually provides. So, after a setback, you pause to examine what the experience taught you about your approach, your knowledge gaps, or the assumptions that shaped your effort. You glean insights that will refine your future actions, turning the failure into an iterative step rather than a dead end. A practical step to reshape your view of failure is adopting a post-mortem habit for every significant disappointment. You take a calm, structured look at what went right, what went wrong, and what can be adapted. Rather than indulging in self-blame, you look for clear lessons. Did you underestimate the time needed? Did you rely too heavily on outdated methods? Each question becomes a stepping stone. Documenting these insights, brief notes or journal entries, helps cement the idea that outcomes, good or bad, are pathways to learning. Next, you proactively seek safe-to-fail experiments, smaller-scale trials that let you stretch your abilities without fearing dire consequences. You learn to see each experiment as data gathering. If something fails, you gain a fresh perspective you wouldn't have otherwise. If it succeeds, you refine your approach and scale up. Over time, your mind becomes more comfortable with risk because it sees risk as a gateway to discovery. This perspective makes you bolder, less hindered by the thought of falling short. Reshaping failure also involves detaching your sense of self from external approval. You might not realize how often you tie your worth to feedback or comparison. When your project isn't recognized or your idea isn't chosen, it can feel personal. But as you practice separating the result from your identity, you free yourself to keep experimenting. You recognize you are not your last project. You are the sum of your learning and growth. This outlook turns each failure into a rung on the ladder, not a trapdoor beneath you. By the time you've integrated this viewpoint, you'll notice an underlying confidence that wasn't there before. Even amid setbacks, you trust yourself to extract meaning and keep moving. This resilience positions you to address a deeper source of stress, the clutter of excessive, nagging thoughts that flood your mind in everyday life. Next, you'll learn how to cut through that mental chatter to create space for clarity and action, establishing a clean mental foundation for whatever comes next. Chapter 9. Eliminating mental clutter. Picture the countless thoughts that race through your mind each day. Reminders, worries, half-formed ideas, and random distractions. These mental fragments can pile up, draining your focus and dampening your sense of peace. It's like a cluttered room where objects lie scattered on every surface, leaving you unsure where to begin. Eliminating mental clutter isn't about striving for an empty head. Rather, it's about curating your mental space so that essential priorities and helpful reflections remain front and center. You start by noticing the noise. Throughout the day, pay attention to when your mind hops from one anxious thought to another, never landing long enough to clarify what truly needs doing. Recognizing this restless flitting is the first step toward quieting it. Without that awareness, mental clutter feels normal, so you assume there's nothing to address. Once you see how incessant and random your thoughts can be, you're motivated to find methods of organizing them. One effective approach is to keep a small capture tool, a notepad, a phone app, where you can quickly offload any stray thought that isn't immediately actionable. Instead of letting an idea or worry swirl in your mind, you jot it down. This process functions like clearing items off a cluttered desk. When your mind knows the thought is safely recorded, it can release it, freeing mental bandwidth. Over time, you develop trust in this system, reducing the impulse to keep every detail spinning in your head. You also explore structured moments of mental housekeeping. At least once a day, you pause to sift through your recent notes and thoughts. You decide which items deserve action, which are just interesting notions, and which can be let go altogether. This habit means you're regularly refining your mental environment, preventing the accumulation of stale concerns or trivial tasks. It's a gentle but consistent discipline that relieves you of the burden of endless rethinking. The effect is noticeable. You feel less overwhelmed and more in control. There's a sharpened clarity in how you approach tasks, and even your downtime feels more restful. Without the constant whirl of unprocessed thoughts, you can engage more fully with the people and activities around you. As mental clutter recedes, your mind can dedicate its energy to the tasks and reflections that genuinely matter. In carving out this mental space, you set a powerful stage for more confident decision-making. When your mind isn't drowning in superfluous thoughts, it becomes easier to evaluate options, weigh risks, and commit to actions. This streamlined clarity leads directly into the next phase, learning how to strengthen your decision muscle so that you move forward without the paralyzing hesitation that often comes with overwhelm. With clutter out of the way, you're ready to act. Chapter 10. Strengthening your decision muscle. Think about the times you've hesitated so long on a choice that an opportunity passed you by. Maybe you overanalyzed every possible angle, worrying about what might go wrong. Indecision can be exhausting, draining the energy you need to actually move forward. Yet decision-making, like a muscle, grows stronger with consistent use. The transition from chronic second-guessing to confident action starts when you appreciate that decisions are not rigid finalities, but stepping stones you can adjust as you learn. You begin by practicing small, low-stakes decisions quickly. Whether it's picking a lunch option or deciding what book to read next, you commit and move on. This might seem trivial, but your mind gets used to the act of choosing rather than lingering in mental loops. If doubt arises, you acknowledge it and proceed anyway. Over time, These little choices build a foundation of trust in your capacity to make a call and handle the consequences. In parallel, you learn to set a decision deadline for bigger choices, preventing infinite analysis. You decide, by the end of the day, I'll pick a course of action. This deadline doesn't force recklessness. It encourages focused evaluation. You gather relevant details, weigh them calmly, then act. When your deadline arrives, you commit. This process keeps you from tumbling endlessly in what-ifs. Even if you're not 100% sure, you lean into the reality that few decisions are completely irreversible. By choosing, you also gain real feedback that helps refine your path. Another valuable shift is reframing mistakes as data. If you make a decision that leads to complications, you don't conclude you're incompetent. Instead, you assess the outcome, gather insights, and adapt. This approach treats decision-making as a cycle of continuous improvement, rather than a high-stakes test. You discover that even a wrong choice often beats inaction because it reveals necessary information and moves you out of stagnation. As you progress, you notice you're less prone to overthinking each possible angle. You grant yourself permission to be imperfect, recognizing that many successful paths emerge from trial and adjustment. With a calmer mind, you also free up energy to engage with life's daily demands. You begin to approach situations with a quiet confidence, trusting that you can meet challenges head-on without getting stuck in the mire of indecision. Once you've established a habit of decisive action, you're primed for a deeper level of ownership over how you spend your time. Making decisions swiftly helps you break out of reactive modes. Now, you can shift your focus to structuring your days with more intentionality, ensuring that each hour aligns with the goals and values you've decided matter most. This natural evolution leads you toward reclaiming control over time itself, transforming your relationship with your daily schedule and the demands placed upon you. Chapter 11. Reclaiming control over time. Think about how often you glance at the clock and feel a surge of stress. Whether it's juggling responsibilities or feeling behind on personal projects, time can seem like an unforgiving master. But what if you reversed that dynamic? What if you approached each day with a plan that prioritizes what genuinely matters and refuses to let external demands constantly steal your focus? Reclaiming control over time starts with shifting from a reactive mindset to one that designs each day around meaningful intentions. You start by identifying your core priorities, those tasks or relationships that, if nurtured, lead to lasting impact. Instead of scribbling endless to-do lists, you decide on a small set of non-negotiables that align with your deeper goals. Maybe it's dedicating an hour to a creative pursuit, connecting with a loved one, or moving an important project forward. By placing these priorities at the forefront of your schedule, you anchor your day in what truly matters. Next, you develop a habit of strategic no. This doesn't mean rejecting every opportunity that comes your way. It means discerning whether a new request or invitation aligns with your identified priorities. The urge to people please or not miss out can tempt you to overload your calendar. But each time you say yes to something trivial, you rob attention from something vital. When you learn to graciously decline requests that don't fit your priorities, you protect your energy. This feels uncomfortable at first, but over time it liberates you from obligations that derail your own commitments. Another practical shift is structuring your day in intentional blocks. You decide when to handle emails, when to focus on creative work, and when to handle personal tasks. By grouping similar activities, you minimize the mental friction of switching back and forth. This clarity extends to breaks, which you schedule to recharge rather than randomly taking them out of fatigue. With each purposeful block, you feel a sense of alignment, as if you're conducting your day rather than letting it run away with you. As you apply this level of structure, time begins to feel like a resource you manage rather than a current sweeping you along. You notice that even free periods become more enjoyable because you're not weighed down by guilt or a lingering to-do list. You recognize exactly what needs doing and when it will happen, allowing you to be fully present in your downtime. By taking authorship of your story, you transform from a passive character into the active protagonist of your life. Chapter 12. Owning your narrative. Think of how easily circumstances can define a person's story. If you face setbacks, you might identify as someone destined to struggle. If life hands you early successes, you might become complacent, assuming the best days are behind you. Yet the narrative that shapes your life doesn't have to be dictated by random events. This presence nourishes your focus and well-being, making you more effective and fulfilled overall. Having reclaimed some control over your schedule, you turn to an even deeper aspect of self-leadership, your personal story. Because even if you master your daily routine, your sense of who you are can either propel you forward or pull you back. Next, you'll explore how to own your narrative, rewriting the script that drives your choices and shapes your reality. When you step into authorship of your personal story, you choose how to interpret challenges, triumphs, and everything in between, gaining the power to direct your own evolution. You start by recognizing moments you've relinquished control of the narrative. Maybe you've let others' opinions of you, whether negative or flattering, define your self-image. Or perhaps you've allowed a single failure to overshadow your many strengths. Identifying these instances helps you see how passively adopting a story can steer you off track. The shift involves acknowledging you have the final say in how your experiences are woven together into meaning. One way to own your narrative is to rewrite key chapters from your past. You pick a formative event, perhaps a painful letdown, and consciously reinterpret it. Instead of viewing it as a testament to your limitations, you highlight the resilience and lessons it demanded. This doesn't change the facts, it changes your perspective. Each time you revisit that memory, you emphasize the growth you derived. Gradually, that becomes the dominant lens through which you recall the event. This reframing isn't about denial. It's about choosing to see your experiences as building blocks instead of tombstones. You also create a forward-looking statement about where you're headed. Instead of waiting for life to label you, you declare the direction you intend to take. Maybe you decide you're on a path to master a certain skill, cultivate deeper relationships, or contribute in meaningful ways. This statement is less about rigid goals and more about the guiding theme you choose for your life. Writing it down or revisiting it daily ensures it seeps into your subconscious, guiding your choices. As you integrate this perspective, you notice your internal dialogue and actions begin aligning with the new story you're crafting. You make decisions that reflect the identity you're nurturing, rather than defaulting to old habits. Challenges become plot twists, not dead ends. Moments of triumph feel richer because they reinforce your chosen path. This sense of ownership radiates outwards, influencing your interactions and fueling a deeper sense of purpose. By taking charge of your personal narrative, you affirm that you're not just a bystander in your own life. You've built a solid framework to face adversity with intention and to celebrate growth on your terms. Now, with your new story forming beneath your feet, the next step is to amplify your mental stamina, cultivating an unyielding grit to carry you through when circumstances become tough. This will ensure your story continues to evolve powerfully, no matter what obstacles arise. Chapter 13. Developing relentless grit. You start by observing your mental dialogue when exhaustion hits. Does your inner voice insist that you stop, telling you there's no point in continuing, or that you're doomed to fail anyway? You counter that instinct with a small but decisive move. If you're physically pushing your limits, say, during a workout, you do one more repetition. If it's a creative pursuit, you commit to a bit more effort, even when you feel stuck. Remember the last time you considered giving up on a goal simply because it felt too hard. Maybe you convinced yourself that it wasn't worth the struggle, or that you lacked the capacity to push further. Those moments can define the boundaries of your potential. Cultivating relentless grit allows you to move that boundary outward, embracing the uncomfortable truth that real growth emerges most clearly when you persist beyond your perceived limits. These extra pushes become symbolic acts of defiance, refusing to let the impulse to quit dictate your choices. Over time, you establish a practice of incremental difficulty. Just as weightlifters gradually add heavier loads to strengthen their muscles, You increase the challenges you face in everyday life. This might be taking on a tougher project at work or tackling a new skill that initially feels overwhelming. The point is not to leap into the impossible, but to steadily expand your comfort zone. Each achievement in these incremental steps reinforces your sense that you can handle more than you once believed. You also learn to harness purpose as fuel. Grit tends to falter when you lose sight of why you're pushing. Reflecting on the deeper reasons behind your goals, whether it's personal growth, contributing to loved ones, or fulfilling a long-held ambition, keeps your spirit aligned with the effort. This emotional anchor transforms grueling moments from senseless struggle into meaningful pursuits. Grit becomes the active expression of your commitment to something you value more than comfort. As you exercise grit in various spheres of life, you'll notice that your threshold for giving up shifts. Tasks that once felt insurmountable begin to seem like stepping stones. You develop a reputation for resilience, but more importantly, you cultivate self-respect. There's a certain quiet pride in knowing you can endure and adapt when things become difficult. This pride isn't arrogance. It's the recognition that you have a resource of determination that can't be easily shaken by circumstance. Grit propels you forward, but your mind also needs moments of renewal. Too much exertion without rest can lead to burnout. Finding internal stillness becomes critical, enabling you to recharge and maintain clarity amid life's demands. In the next chapter, you'll delve into the practice of cultivating mental calm, discovering how moments of deliberate stillness sharpen your perspective and refine your ability to remain unshaken by external chaos. Chapter 14. Cultivating internal stillness. Think about the background chatter that often accompanies your day. Even when you're not actively stressed, your mind might hum with to-do lists, random anxieties, or flashbacks to past events. It's like the static on a radio station never fully tuned. Cultivating internal stillness means learning to turn down that static, creating intervals of genuine mental quiet. This doesn't eliminate life's noise, but changes your relationship to it, so you're less caught in its current. You begin with intentional pauses. Instead of rushing from task to task, you pause for a minute or two, letting your attention rest on something simple, a steady breath, a natural sound, or the sensation of your feet on the floor. In that short space, your mind might continue to churn. That's normal. You gently allow those thoughts to drift without engaging them. This small discipline trains your mind to accept moments of quiet without scrambling for something to fill it. You can extend this practice through brief periods of solitude. Perhaps you set aside 10 minutes each evening to simply sit, without music, messages, or tasks. Your only aim is to notice how thoughts arise and pass. Initially, this can feel boring or even uncomfortable, especially if you're used to constant stimulation. Yet, as you continue, you discover a newfound calm that surfaces when you're not endlessly reacting to stimuli. This stillness becomes a kind of mental reset button, clearing away accumulated mental tension. Another aspect of internal stillness involves reducing digital noise. You might reserve certain hours where you avoid checking your phone or social media, particularly first thing in the morning or right before bed. These intervals create a buffer around your inner world, preventing the intrusion of countless external opinions and demands. Over time, you notice that your days feel less fragmented. You're more present, not only to your own thoughts and emotions, but also to the people and experiences in your life. This internal stillness doesn't make you passive. On the contrary, it allows you to respond to challenges with greater clarity. In a tense situation, you can more easily recognize your emotional reactions and decide how you want to proceed, rather than reflexively lashing out or shutting down. You also find your creativity flourishes in these calmer waters. Fresh ideas or solutions often surface when your mind isn't crowded by constant input or rushed tasks. Embracing these intervals of mental quiet lays a foundation for sustained mental greatness. In the last phase of your journey, you'll learn how to maintain this evolved mindset over the long haul. It's not just about achieving a sense of clarity once. It's about weaving these transformative practices into your life so thoroughly that they become second nature. You're poised to integrate all these steps into a cohesive approach, ensuring your newfound perspective remains strong through life's inevitable ups and downs. Chapter 15. Sustaining Mental Greatness. Consider what it's like to finally feel a surge of clarity, confidence, and motivation, only to watch it slip away after a few weeks because daily life reasserts its old rhythms. True transformation hinges on creating a lasting shift, one that persists through stress, routine, and the slow erosion of old habits. Sustaining mental greatness means you weave the practices you've learned into the very fabric of your days, ensuring they shape not just a moment in time but the arc of your life. You begin by revisiting the core insights gained so far. Whether it's questioning negative thoughts, embracing discomfort, or safeguarding your focus, you note which practices resonated most powerfully. Then you commit to small daily actions that reinforce them. Maybe every morning, you reflect briefly on a single guiding principle, such as mental flexibility or mindful breathing, and decide how to apply it that day. This creates consistency, as you're actively recalling and re-engaging with the mindset you've built. Next, you establish cycles of reflection to maintain self-awareness. Every few weeks, you assess where you stand. Are certain old habits creeping back in? Are you skimping on the quiet moments you once found so restorative? By identifying these slips early, you can course-correct before they solidify into a renewed pattern of limitation. Rather than berating yourself, you treat it as feedback, using the data to refine your approach. This cycle of implement, reflect, adjust becomes your built-in mechanism for steady improvement. Another powerful element is surrounding yourself with reminders and supportive influences. This could mean connecting with individuals who share your commitment to growth or revisiting books and recordings that once inspired you. Consistent exposure to uplifting environments keeps your focus anchored. Over time, you become your own best reinforcement, capable of sustaining your progress even when external cheerleaders fade. You also grow more adept at filtering out unhelpful inputs, limiting activities or media that undermine your mindset. Eventually, the practices of mental clarity, emotional regulation, and decisive action interlock. They stop feeling like separate strategies and start to function as an integrated whole. When you wake each morning, you naturally question limiting beliefs, set intentions for your day, and adapt fluidly to changes. This holistic shift forms the essence of mental greatness, an ongoing commitment to self-awareness, growth, and resilience, rather than a destination you reach once and forget. By sustaining this mindset, you discover that each step forward compels further evolution. Challenges arise, but they become catalysts for deepening the very skills that have carried you this far. You stand rooted in the knowledge that your mind is not a prison, but a launching pad for limitless transformation. Your perspective broadens, your emotional balance steadies, and your actions align ever more seamlessly with the life you choose to create. This marks the culmination of your journey through these chapters, but in truth, it's the beginning of an ongoing adventure in self-mastery, one in which the possibilities expand as you continue to elevate your thinking.